Alright, hello and welcome! It's been a while. We haven't done a builds video in quite a bit, but I figure it's about time to start refreshing a bunch of these, and who better to go first than Banshee? She just got her Prime, and I don't believe she's gotten a builds video before, because I had reason to in the past. But her Prime has changed a few things, and my view on what Banshee is useful for has kind of changed, so let's go over some of this. So first of all, we have Resonance. So Resonance is a very nice build for going far into endgame-ish scenarios, where you're fighting enemies that are like level 100 plus. This will allow you to kill them as though they were like level, let's say 20, which is pretty fucking good, as you might imagine. This is due to Resonance being an incredible augment, and due to her ability to boost your damage with that just at face value by a hefty margin. Also, it's worth noting, these critical multipliers stack. So, whenever you're getting that almost 10x damage, if you get two spots one on top of each other, they get about 100x damage, and then you can, although it's more rare, of course, get three spots on top of each other for like 1000x damage on anytime you're shooting that spot of an enemy. So it's a very, very powerful skill that can allow Banshee to do a fuck ton of damage. This build also allows her to use silence as a panic button, although it's obviously not going to be as good as a build that is revolving around silence. And Soundquake with this, due to the efficiency, is just not really viable. Having an 8 energy per second drain, unless you really need it in a panic at 32 meters, which you won't, is just not going to be very good for you. And in general, this type of Banshee, in a more stationary scenario, relies on teammates to keep them safe. So Frost is your best friend in a lot of scenarios. That being said, you can play this solo. You need to keep moving. You need to move pretty much at all times. You will die very, very quickly, even with Quick Thinking and Prime Flow, which this is here because it can save you from just like the little things getting you, like 2 or 3 Lancer bullets. You will now be able to survive that when you're doing this. And in general, you're not going to be in a lot of positions as Banshee, or you shouldn't be at least, where the stumble from Quick Thinking will come into play. If it does, you would have died anyway. Other than that, that's basically what this build does. So the other build we have is a Savage Silence build. So this is a viable thing for Banshee to do. This can be a melee viable Banshee without Naramon. That being said, what this build does is essentially what Naramon does, only it is much more difficult to do in practice. So if you want to challenge yourself, this can be a fun thing to do. I have had some fun testing this build, and we'll show that off with an Atarax. It is essentially, if you don't have Naramon, this can be a way for your melee weapons to get that kind of stealth damage you want, but there are much easier routes to go about that, such as using Loki, Ash, invisibility, Warframes. So this is a fun build that I might suggest you try out and see if you have fun with it. But in general, I think Resonance is going to be a lot better. So we're going to show that first. High fire rate weapons help here, although I will usually carry a high damage weapon like the Tigress. Tigress is just generally good and gives me the status on the back burner. If I need it for enemies that have a fuckload of armor, this will cut right through them regardless, even without the damage buff, to a certain level, of course. Beyond that, Banshee is capable of hitting absurd levels of damage on single targets with a weapon like the Lanka. You can very easily get like over 10 million damage using the Lanka if you're Banshee, which is a hell of a lot, but it's not usually going to be a thing you need. In fact, I think just about never that's going to be a thing you're going to need. So with that, the Axolotos are generally going to be my best friend here, because all you have to do is shoot the spot and things usually just die. So for builds videos, as a refresher for anyone who has maybe not seen this type of video before, from me anyway, I do these tests as my same why would you use tests that I do for weapons, but it's at level 80 instead of 50 because I'm using an entire kit of things. I'm using the Warframe and the weapons I've picked out, and a Sentinel and all that business. So a 30 level bump on the test should be very, very easy for a Warframe to pass, and generally that is true. Also, level 80 is about where the kind of general things you'll see pretty much end. Sorties will go slightly above that in some cases, and raids are very slightly above that, although that's mostly infested units, which I would kind of count like a level 100 infested is equal to about like a level 70 corrupted unit. to me. So it ends roughly around 80 is where you're going to be actually doing content. So that's why this test is of that level. Moving on. This is going to be a couple of starter resonance, and you're going to very quickly realize that this build does a hell of a lot of damage. The status of the Axolettos combined with just the raw power that Banshee can kick out, plus resonance, which is making it easy for me to stack stack even more of those spots where I need it on enemies. That explosion hit me through that wall, and it probably shouldn't have. Just the occasional refresher. Also, one of the really nice things about Banshee is that her 2, and this is not really like a thing you're going to notice super often, but in scenarios where you're in more open spaces, her 2 does identify where enemies are, which can be very useful. I lost track of that bombard rocket and got punished for it. But that's why we bring things like quick thinking. So. See, damage. Very, very high. That was without even really cutting through that guy's armor, which is pretty fucking good. Just like 2 or 3 bullets from these, and these are status weapons by and large, albeit they are the best pistols in the game. In general, you can see the increase in damage is pretty fucking large. These hitting for about 15k per bullet, which is very big. And whenever you're covering them in so many spots, you can generally just kind of spray and you will hit them. You can be more precise, but it's generally very much not needed. And yeah, Resonance is not really a solo build, but obviously you can do work with it, as we just did. And it works very, very well. That being said, if you're going solo for some reason as Banshee, I think Savage Silence will in general do you a bit better. Mostly because melee is so much stronger than guns are, and it's also, it is technically worth noting that with the Resonance build, you can use melee. You can go Resonance, Naramon, melee build, and you can melee the weak points. That is like the least necessary amount of damage I think that you could realistically be talking about. If you're using Resonance and Atarax and Naramon at the same time, and whatever you're fighting is not dying, either it's immune to melee, or you have a much larger problem. So, that being said, this build focuses on spamming 3 a lot. The stun will last about as long as the ability, so if you're going to use this build a lot, then I would suggest probably rebinding what your power 3 is on to, like, alt or something, because it will make your life way easier. That being said, this is a very effective build, because it stuns everything in a very large area for enough time that you can mop them up. And it opens them to finishers because of the augments, and you can see the weakness is great. Generally with like the Atarax, you're going to want to be doing your spin attack. It's also worth noting that if you time your 3 presses, you will be in a position where you cannot be knocked down. And this will kill most things. And obviously, granted, this is an Atarax, but this is Banshee's kind of most effective form of CC, where she can still do things, which is nice. That being said, with this build, because it has very high efficiency, you can use this a bit, which is decently effective for a little while. I think it still drains too much energy, and it locks you down into one position. You're better off moving and hitting your 3, I think. But it is a viable thing. There's also a version of this build that uses a much shorter range and a slightly longer duration to kind of corral enemies in and out of your 3's range over and over at a longer duration, which will continually stun them that way. I find that build to be very inconsistent, just due to like a lot of the map design that is in Warframe. It doesn't really allow you to abuse that limiter a lot of the time. So just being able to hit 3 again a lot is usually very effective, and most melee weapons do enough damage. And you're mostly looking for range, like an Orthos Prime or whatnot, whenever you're using something like this, just to mop up the enemies that are super stunned. And then, like, the final thing I suppose we should note, this build I've been messing with. I'm not super happy with it yet. This is a resonating Quake build that uses energy conversion. If you were to want, for some reason, to farm at low levels with Banshee instead of a Warframe like Saren or Ember, you could use this to just, like, hit 4 in the middle of a defense, a low-level defense. This will kill pretty much everything up until level, let's call it, like, 30 or 40-ish. So that'll wipe the map of all things if you're looking to do that. And then this build also remains somewhat viable to use Resonance. Obviously, you're not getting the effects of your energy conversion, but even just at base value, Sonar will give you a 5x critical multiplier, which is quite a bit of damage, so that still remains kind of fine. Beyond that, that's kind of what there is to Banshee. I would encourage people to remember that Banshee is incredibly fragile. One of the most fragile Warframes in the game. So, if you're using Resonance and you're dying a lot, that comes with the territory of being Banshee. Banshee is 2 sticks held together by wet toilet paper in terms of how tough she is, even with the boost that her Prime gets. So, be careful if you're going to use builds. Otherwise, that's all I got for you today. And I'll see you tomorrow.